Hi there, this is Ajit Krishnadas back with another video. This time I'll go through a text I wrote a few years back. It's called "Is God a Psychological Crutch?" Because usually atheists will use this argument that theists or people who believe in God, they simply use God as a psychological crutch. God doesn't really exist, but theists invent God in order to, because they are weak-minded. So they need a crutch, a psychological crutch. And this is their argument. So if you like, you can visit my blog, vaishnavaapologetics.wordpress.com, for more texts and longer texts also, and videos defeating atheism. So let us take a look at the argument in more detail. Atheists often argue against the existence of God by claiming that theists believe in God due to nothing more than psychological reasons. For example, Sigmund Freud, who was the founder of the psychoanalytical school of psychiatry, claimed that religious belief is an obsessional neurosis, that God is nothing more than a psychological crutch, an illusion, a form of wishful thinking caused by human weakness. Freud claimed to be able to trace back the illusory concept of God to an often subconscious, childish desire to be protected. He argued that God simply is a substitute for the perfect father that the weak religious person never really had. The atheists also claim that religious people use God as a crutch when they can deal with life's tough realities. Now, sometimes life is hard, and if you're weak, the atheists will say that then you have a tendency to invent a God or invent religion in order to kind of cope with these tough realities of life. Or when they refer to the power of God to explain things otherwise inexplicable. So the atheists will say that often theists, they invent God so they can simply say that, wow, we cannot explain this thing in nature, for example. Let us see, we look in nature and there are things we cannot explain. So the theist will have a tendency to claim, says the atheist, that, wow, this is inexplicable, God must have done it. Or also when they claim God listens to prayers, sometimes religious people, theists, claim that God listens to their prayers, they pray to God, and they find solace. They take shelter in God, but the atheist will say, well, this is simply using God as a crutch. You simply invent God because you need to pray to someone because you're weak. Or when they claim God forgives them and removes their bad conscience. Of course, this is in connection with listens to prayers, that the atheist will say that, well, religious people, they have all kinds of ideas about morality, and when they imagine they have done something sinful, they need to pray to God, they need to invent God and pray to Him so that He can forgive them and remove their bad conscience. So according to Freud and many critics of religion, it is only mature and rational human beings that have risen higher on the evolutionary ladder who is above the phantasmagoria of religion. So of course atheists, they like this because they like to think of themselves as being on the top rung on the evolutionary ladder. And they like to say that people who are religious and believe in God, they're simply closer to the animals or closer to the monkeys, So they see it as their mission to help religious people guide the psychological energy that's directed towards the illusory God in heaven back to the real material world. Because according to atheism, according to naturalism, this material world is the only thing that there is, So let us take a look at this argument from the logical perspective, and this is very important that you educate yourself with some basic logical skills, because then it becomes very easy for you to defeat arguments such as this one. As you'll see, this is an extremely foolish argument, but it's wrapped up in so-called science, and big scholars like Freud and so on. They kind of take this argument and they wrap it very nicely, but when you open it, you'll see that there's simply just stool inside. It's a completely ridiculous argument. So we will take a look at what is called the psychogenetic fallacy. And the genetic fallacy is committed when it is claimed that the origin of a specific proposition has an inherent bearing on its truth value. And when the origin is said to be of a psychological nature, the fallacy is called the psychogenetic fallacy. This atheistic argument commits this fallacy, since it claims that the proposition God exists is false due to its origin in the psychological needs of theists. There is clearly no warrant for such a conclusion, since the coexistence of God and psychological needs for God is possible. Just because theists have psychological needs for God, it doesn't follow that psychological needs are the one and only reason they believe in Him. They will usually offer quite a few additional reasons. For example, theists will often use the design argument, the moral argument, the cosmological argument, and other arguments for the existence of God. They will not simply claim that God exists because they feel a need for Him. Actually, I've never heard any theist claim that the only reason he believed in God was that he felt a need for it. But even if, for the sake of argument, psychological needs were the only reason for believing in God, it still would not disprove the existence of God. Just like our psychological needs for loving relationships with other people does not disprove the existence of these other people, so our psychological needs for God doesn't disprove the existence of God. This should be obvious, but to the atheists who, are lacking in brain substance, this is not at all, logical. They can't see this point. So, turning the argument against the atheists. Is atheism a psychological crutch? Now, the atheistic argument is like a double-edged sword. Let us stop here.